Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have nonprofit leader and kind of advertising agency extraordinaire, Bill McKendry, with us. Bill, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast today.
It's awesome to be with you today. Appreciate it.
So, Bill, we're going to talk about your latest resource and kind of your what's kind of become a mission statement for you, which is do more good. And as I was perusing all of your material and getting to learn your story a little bit more, um, what's the genesis for this movement? And is it any coincidence that you're pushing this at a time when it feels like the country's never been so divided?
Yeah, I started on this journey actually. I created the term "do more good" in 1999, and I
Mm,
actually trademarked it then. And it really, um, I was surprised that I could trademark it, right? So, but
right?
I literally when I plugged in the words into the trademark office website and said, hey, does anybody else own these words, and this phrase, and it came back that nobody did, and I was like, how's that possible? You know, so I really felt like
Hmm.
God uh, created a platform for me, right? But it actually started 5 years previous to that in 1994. I actually started an advertising agency. I had worked at a big advertising agency that was based in New York, and I worked in their Denver office, right? And so I worked on things like American Express and Dodge and Taco Bell and Kohler. And interestingly enough, there was a gentleman that worked across the street from me in Denver, a guy named Jim Hainan, that I wouldn't end up meeting till I moved back to Michigan. And again, and he had we knew of each other in Denver, but we didn't really know each other, right? We worked at competing ad
Hmm.
agencies. And then I moved back to Michigan and his career takes him on to Chicago and he ends up working with Leo Burnett in Chicago. And Leo Burnett is one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world. And Jim's career uh, took him to the top of that agency, and he did really phenomenal work for like McDonald's, for example, and
Oh, wow.
he did 6 years worth of Super Bowl ads for McDonald's, which one is still ranked as one of the top three Super Bowl ads in the history of Super Bowl advertising. That was the one with Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. I don't know if you ever
Oh,
saw
yeah. I
that
know
one.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, nothing but
Yeah.
net. Name of that commercial, and that was Jim's commercial, right? And and so, I ended up reconnecting with Jim and taking him on as my partner in Michigan. I lured him away from Leo Burnett, and but where the conversation really started, and I'll get to where how this gets to do more good. Where the conversation really started is we were both 33 years old at the time, and we both
Mm,
had already achieved success by that time. We both had, you know, when we looked at our careers and if you looked and examined our careers from an award standpoint, from a money standpoint, from a prestige standpoint, we by 33 we both had already experienced a great amount of success. Yet we were sitting together and uh, and we were talking about our careers and where we were going to go, and uh, and we were both not satisfied. There was something gnawing away at us, and the conversation started, quite honestly, is I had landed a client, that was based in Tucson, Arizona, and, that client had their own bowl game, for example. They're called Weiserlock, and they had a Weiserlock Copper Bowl, in Tucson,
oh,
Arizona,
wow.
and, for a little agency in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I relocated after Colorado, that was a big deal. And Jim was asking me, he says, "Well, aren't how can you not be satisfied? You left the big agency world, you started your own little agency, and you landed a pretty good sized client. And how can you not be happy?" And I looked at him and I said, well, Weiserlock makes just so you have a frame of reference, they make doorknobs and handle sets that you can buy at Home Depot and Lowe's, right? And I looked at
Yeah.
Jim I looked at Jim and I said, we've both done a lot of really great things in our career, right? But where I'm at right now is I'm afraid that someday I'm going to die, and on my tombstone it's going to say Bill McKendry is one of the world's greatest marketers of doorknobs and handle sets, maybe the best in the entire history of that category. And I go, I don't want to die with that on my gravestone.
Hmm.
Interestingly, at that point, Jim and I had
And
known each other for a long time, but we didn't know. Like in the big advertising world, it's a lot like Hollywood. You don't talk about politics, you don't talk about your religion. And Jim said to me, he said, Bill, we've known each other a long time, but I've never asked you this question. Are you a Christian?
hmm.
I said, yes, I am. I said, Jim, I am a Christian. Are you a Christian? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm a Christian too. He said, I think what's gnawing at you right now is, you know, did God make us to sell credit cards, hamburgers, tacos, cars, toilets, you name it, doorknobs, handle sets? Did God, is that the reason why he gave us these skills? Or did he give us these skills to do something different?
Hmm.
We started a lunch conversation, and the lunch conversation was simply to talk about doing some work together. But Jim asked me this question during that lunch conversation. He said, "What kind of agency, if we could just theoretically talk about something, what kind of agency would Jesus want us to work at?"
Wow.
It started as a lunch conversation that went till 4 o'clock in the morning the next day, and we actually literally mapped
4 o'clock in the morning?
4 o'clock in the morning the
Wow.
next day, and we mapped out what we felt like was, you know, an advertising agency that would serve Jesus. And we said, the voice of faith, the voice of human kindness, the voice of charity in our culture is not competing well. How would we
Hmm.
how would we how would we help that? What would we do to help nonprofit organizations and specifically faith-based ministries to compete better in the marketplace? So we started an ad agency in 1994 based in Grand Rapids. We eventually had opened an office in Colorado Springs later, called Hayden McKendry, and we set about using our skills that we had learned working with some of the world's best marketers and said, how can we apply this to places that really matter, to places that really make a difference, to more meaningful work? So in 1999, 5 years later, the American Advertising Federation recognized me as the person doing the best cause marketing work in the country. They brought me to New York
Oh,
City,
wow.
and they gave me their top award for doing cause marketing. I had to give a speech, and the president of the American Advertising Federation approached me after that speech, and he said, You've got to go on tour. You've got to share your knowledge with nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations, what you know, and how they can really compete in this world, and what they really need to do in order to really capture our country's imagination again and their hearts,
Hmm.
right? And so when they asked me to do that, I said, "Sure, I would do it," but at that point, I really wasn't a public speaker, and so I sought some counsel and stuff like that, and everybody said, "You gotta have a handle," and so I come up with the handle, "Do More Good." I go to the trademark office, and
Hmm.
I'm able to register it, and so Do More Good is really rooted in our beliefs and my beliefs in that God gave me a gift of being able to speak persuasively, to communicate effectively, and to be able to be a translator of dreams, right? I always say I'm like Joseph from the Bible, right? I'm a translator of dreams and a trusted advisor. And so my job is to work with nonprofit organizations and faith based organizations and help them communicate to a market that is fiercely competitive with a consumeristic, materialistic world.
Yeah. I love that, and what I like about Do More Good as it pertains to kind of your brand is that it's not just do more good like you're trying to do more good, but you're trying to help these nonprofits do more good with the tools that you're giving them. So you're, um, in the army, we used to call it a force multiplier, right? You're a catalyst in a lot of
Exactly.
ways.
Yeah, it isn't until you like really meet with nonprofit executives and leaders of faith-based ministries do you really wake them up to the competitive forces that they're against, right? And when you realize, when you really sit with them and you realize, what do you need in order for your organization to grow and be successful, right? Typically, they need people's awareness, they need people's
Hmm.
time, and they need people's money. Some combination of those things, I probably all of them, right? And so when you really break it down, they're in the business of competing for discretionary time and money. And then I remind them, your competition, even though nonprofit organizations and faith-based organizations never like to talk about competition, your competition is fierce for those things. And they go,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a whole bunch of nonprofits and organizations out there. I go, no, 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 no. Apple, Budweiser, Pepsi, Harley Davidson, Nike, that's your competition. And if you want to stand out in this marketplace, if you're sitting here and you're wondering why has this country gone to be such a nation of consumers rather than a nation of citizens? Why have we gone so far down the materialistic path? It's because those guys are really good and you guys are not at communicating with the pro.
So, prior to the work I do here with Spirit and Truth, which is a nonprofit that walks alongside churches, I was a local pastor for 10 years.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I really believe is that the local church has a huge marketing problem because we
Oh,
have the best story in the world and no succinct way to say it. So I'm going to put you in a make believe position. You have now just been promoted to marketing for the global, or let's just say the North American church. What's the one thing that you're gonna get all of these organizations to, I mean, how do we sell it better, Bill? Like, fix us, make us get this out, this word that's life-giving and important out to the masses. How do we do it first?
yeah. So uh, I'm dealing with some secret ammunition that you don't know about. You didn't even know about before we got into this interview, right? So when you ask that question, I'm gonna go off completely off script from Do More Good and tell you I'm already doing that right now, and
Oh,
that's because
really?
yeah, and and our problems are actually worse than what you just said. Uh,
Mhm.
so I was approached by a group of very successful individuals who are Christians who are concerned about exactly what you're talking about, the church and Christianity and the state of Christianity. And they came to realize that not only have we been seeing trends going the wrong way for the church, right, and Christianity, but the reality is uh, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, we're a hate group.
Hmm.
And you say, how can that be, right? And who is the Southern Poverty Law Center? First of all, I don't want to trash the Southern Poverty Law Center. They've actually done a lot of fantastic things, especially on the topic of racism in this country over the years, right? But
Sure.
for whatever reason, they have become the arbiter in this country of who is a hate group. And if you go to the Southern Poverty Law Center right now and go to their hate group website, and they'll have all mapped out who are the hate groups in the United States, and you're going to see a list that starts with neo Nazis, white supremacists, the KKK, and then Christian identity, the Catholic
Wow.
Church, right?
Wow.
And uh, the problem is the Southern Poverty Law Center is now become the standard for Facebook, Instagram, New York Times, Washington Post, all major media, all major academia on who is a hate group and who isn't. And they're labeling Christian
Hmm.
groups like Focus on the Family, like Alliance Defending Freedom. They're labeling them as hate groups because of their stances on same-sex marriage and abortion.
Wow.
And and so So I was presented with a problem statement by a group of very wealthy Christian donors saying, we got to do something. We got to shape our culture for Christ. There needs to be a new awakening, and we've got to do something. We have to do something now. Because they were disturbed when they saw this. And the problem statement that they presented to me at that time was, how did the world's greatest love story become known as a hate group? How did that happen?
Yeah.
Right. So this is how I approach things. I mean, it's like, okay, you got to tell me the problem statement, and you got to tell me what it is that we need to overcome, and then I'm going to figure out, if you want to communicate, which I believe is one of the most powerful vehicles in today's culture, then we need to figure out a way to communicate and differentiate and get through to people what our message is really all about. We did 6 months of research, and I'm here to tell you, if I'm the brand marketer of the Christian brand, right? Number one, the thing that we found in this national survey, and this was a 5,000 person survey, voter ID matched, right? We know that basically, even though we didn't talk to everybody in America, we basically talked to everybody in America, right? Every group, every
Wow. Yeah.
ideology, everything was represented, right? And what was amazing about this research was, we said, uh, we found out that Jesus is not the problem. Christians, Christianity, and the church have a brand problem. Jesus has no brand
Yeah.
problem. Not
Amen to
even
that.
not even
No,
among
everybody
atheists,
understands Jesus.
right?
Yeah.
So, based on that, we started doing all kinds of research too about messaging surrounding Jesus, right? But one of the things that we did is, when we did this survey, you if you took this survey, you would not know that you were being asked by a Christian organization, because we asked all kinds of questions about all kinds of people, including religious figures. We asked questions about Muhammad. We asked questions about Buddha. We asked questions about Gandhi. We asked questions about Jesus, right? And what's interesting
Mm,
is, for people who reject religion, or just don't admit that they're religious, you know, we divided people into basically four groups at the end of this. And we said there are engaged Christians, those are about 30% of America. There's cultural Christians, who are just as big. Another 30% of America are cultural Christians. And those are people who uh, maybe, would self-identify as a Christian, were born into a Christian family, maybe go to church once or twice a year, but they don't tell their friends that they're Christians. And they got some
mm.
issues with the divinity of Christ. They're not fully bought in on all that, right? But they think they're Christians, but they don't really tell other people they're Christians, because they're kind of embarrassed of Christians. But then we have this
Got
group
it.
of skeptics. We have skeptics, which are 24% of America. And then we have, this non-believer, off the rails, 18% of America, or 16% of America, that, you just can't convince. They're science only or proof only type of people. But what was really interesting, one thing that we really found from research was, when we asked people, what is it that, like, for example, what is religion really all about? And people say it's about being a good person, right? It's about
Mm,
learning to become a good person. And there's so many people that say, as a result, I don't need religion. I know what is a good person, and so I'm just going to be focused on being a good person. And so we said, all right, across all belief spectrum, can you guys describe for us what is a good person? The top four answers across the board, this is including atheists, top four answers were: peacekeeper, approachable, compassionate, and loving all. Then we said,
wow.
then we said, All right, so let's go back through these religious figures. Can you tell me what's good about these people? Tell us what's good about Muhammad. Tell us what's good about Buddha. Tell us what's good about Jesus. Tell us what's good about Gandhi. Right? Guess what? Of all the religious figures that we question people about, the only one and one only, matched the top four answers exactly.
Hmm.
Jesus. So, in same order, people ranked Jesus was a peace seeker. He was approachable, he was compassionate, and he loved all. Guess what? Evidence number one, Jesus is written on everybody's hearts, whether they want to admit it or not, right?
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
so then we went and we've created a campaign, and you can look up this campaign. We've just got done testing it in 10 markets. The campaign is called He Gets Us. And you can look at
Hmm.
the website hegetsus.com, but I would encourage you to go to the YouTube channel for He Gets Us and watch the videos and the TV commercials that we put together on this campaign. This campaign just got done running 5 weeks in 10 markets, almost 30 million views of our work on YouTube, targeting skeptics,
Wow.
and the responses have been phenomenal. The number one complaint that we get from people is actually from Christians because they don't understand the
Sure.
language that we're using, right? The language we're using is outside of the language that they're used to using. And they're having a hard time lining up the biblical stories with the story that we have. There's an ad called Teen Mom, and it's basically the story of Jesus's birth, right? And Mary and Joseph
Hmm.
and what they went through. But it's told in very, very, very contemporary language with imagery, black and white still photography, journalistic type quality, just gorgeous photography, but raw and real and authentic, right? And when you get done watching the commercials, the skeptics are going, "Wow, Jesus was born to a teen mom. Jesus did face a lot of the same things that we face. He was challenged by many of the things that we're challenged by. That he was fully human.
Hmm.
He gets us." And it's really just an entree. What we found is if you can create an entree for people to raise their hand and say, "I want to learn more about Jesus," and you provide them with content, we found that over 60% of skeptics want to learn more about Jesus when you allow them to explore that on their own, but then also give them outlets for, okay, now I'm ready to talk to somebody. And so I, to answer your question, we've already started this process. And uh,
Well, let me drill down on that a little bit because
yeah,
I think you brought up a really interesting point, which is it feels like the existing Christian culture is what's preventing us
it
from
is.
changing the brand. Now, you've done so much marketing in your career. I mean, this has to be a pretty common thing, right? Like you go into an organization that feels like it's been super successful, that's
Yep.
maybe since the beginning of time, and all of a sudden they don't want to change or hold on to what they've or get rid of what they've always known. So as you're walking with churches, clients, whoever, through the idea of changing their brand in order to reach those that aren't yet here, or to gain the next part of the market share, or however you want to say it. How do you teach people to be okay with change?
Yeah, I love that question because it reminds me of it was a Harvard Business Review story about second generation businesses and um, and their high degree of failure rate. And it was like,
Hmm.
why do second generation businesses, like, if they can make it, usually if they can make it to the third generation, things get cleaned up and they're able to sustain and move on. But for whatever reason, there's a high failure rate as a first generation passes to a second generation. on a business, right? It's like most vulnerable time in a business besides the starting period. So they actually commissioned a study on second generation businesses, and they had some assumptions going in that maybe the second generation is just a little lazier than the first generation. They aren't go getters, right? They aren't driven like the first generation was, and as a result, you know, second generation kids just couldn't handle it, right? And as a result, the business fails.
Right.
That was the assumption going in. That's all the things that you would think of, right? What they found out instead, though, what they got in was the second generation was more driven, worked more hours, was more
Mm,
committed, and yet the failure rate was hard or was high. What they found was the reason why they become more successful in the third generation rather than the second generation is because the second generation is still trying to repeat a lot of the same things that the first generation did. And so rather than innovate and become new and renewed, they just try to do the same thing as the first generation, but harder. They worked harder. And so Harvard
hmm.
Business Story Review at the end said, what we learned is old ways harder don't work. And I feel like that's the case here is our culture is changing, right? It's constantly changing. I mean, you look at the introduction of social media alone. I look at it with my own kids, for example. It's like I did not grow up with that kind of pressure. I graduated from before social media came back into existence. I graduated in high school in 1980, and there were people I never saw until Facebook started again, right? And it's like,
Right.
had Facebook not started, I probably wouldn't see those people the rest of my life, right? But instead, you got all this constant comparison that's going on and the pressures of social media. This world is evolving and changing all the time, and the pressures are changing. The truth is the truth. The truth is not going to change, right? I mean, Jesus's message is true no matter what. But how we apply that and how we talk about it and how we uh, use it. It can't be the old ways harder. It has to be, we have to think of new language. I sat with a group of extremely influential, is considered to be the top 25 young voices in Christianity today. I went to this private gathering, and before we even started this campaign, I wanted to hear from them, and you can't believe how many of them looked at me as successful as, I mean, these are people that have millions of followers already themselves. And they looked at me and they said, I don't know what's going on, but we need new language. We just don't, we just don't have it anymore. The ways that we've been talking about Christians and Christianity in this country just aren't working like they used to. We need new methods and new practices. That's what this quite honestly, that's what we're doing right now is we're creating new ways to communicate because guess what? There's new frontiers that people are facing.
So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. About the prospect of change, right? I've long believed that change is like a muscle, and you have to keep working it in order to use it. If you don't use it, the muscle atrophies and it eventually grows weak. And so, I think it's safe to say, without being offensive here, Bill, that you're in a later season of life than I am,
Yep.
right? You told me before we recorded you've been married for 38 years. And when I was in the local church, what I always heard is that more seasoned individuals, some might say old, I wouldn't say old, I don't like that word, but more seasoned individuals struggle with change. Is that real, or do we just get lazy in the muscle? What do you think?
I think it's a combination of both. I think, I mean, you know, when you're not constantly changing, when you're not trying to keep up, you suffer from atrophy, right? And as a result, you just don't have the strength to change. But I've always believed in myself as, I'm a I'm a lifelong learner. That I believe that's how I stay young in my mind is saying, if I don't learn something today, man, that was a wasted day.
Mm,
And so I want to keep my mind fresh. I want to keep open to change. And this world is constantly evolving and changing. I happen to be in a business that demands that you stay current, right? And stay on top of change and really understand what's going on and be comfortable with it. You know, you know, we were just talking this morning. We've had issues with actually advertising on Instagram and Facebook with this campaign, and
I bet.
Facebook has been giving us a hard time, and we're still not approved on this campaign. And we tried for 5 weeks to get approval to run on Facebook, and they don't give us a straight answer, but but then, I was asked this morning, it's like, well, what if eventually we can't advertise on Facebook and Instagram? I go, no worry. It's like, Snapchat and TikTok and other vehicles are taking their place. Quite honestly, we may not even want to advertise on Facebook and Instagram in not too long time because that's for old people, right? Where we want to be
Right.
is in this new mediums, right? So I think you have to force yourself to be able to change, right? And I look at Jesus and his history of how he was a communicator, and I have to be honest that everything I understood from a marketing standpoint, when it comes to who how Jesus spoke, is exactly what I was taught as a marketer, how to speak, right? So
Mm.
he started with people's conditions, right? He never started with what he wanted to tell them. He started with where they were at. Then he spoke
Oh, that's
to
good.
their condition, right? He spoke to their condition. He modified his language so that they would understand him. His stories were adapted to their lives. He told farmers farmer stories. He told fishermen stories, right? He told soldiers soldier stories, right? He he adapted his storytelling and his parables to those people. He didn't demand that they come to his level and his experience and his understanding. He came down to them. And that's a lesson, I think, for all of us of why we have to constantly be learning and changing and understanding. The truth is the truth of it's universal. It's the power of the truth is never going to change. How we communicate it, we need to be like Jesus. We need to be willing to bring it to the people in a way that they'll understand it and feel it and grasp it on their own so that it has an impact on them like Jesus had an impact on them, right? He modeled for us everything about what we're supposed to do.
One of the things that's interesting about your story, and you're very open about, is the reality that you were born to two deaf parents.
Yeah,
And so you spent the majority of your adolescence, well, childhood and adolescence translating for them. And I'm wondering, what did you learn about yourself and about God, of course, in hindsight, translating for your parents for, 20 years?
yeah. You know, I I always I was a oops baby, right? So I was like the closest sibling to me was 7 years older, and I used to tell my parents it's like you just ran out of kids and you needed another translator, so you guys had another kid. I mean that's so they laughed. I mean, my parents had a great sense of humor, but yeah. So I was born into a family where sign language was my first language, and I had to
Mm,
translate for my parents from an early age. And you tell people, I was doing car deals when I was like 6 years old. I was helping them renegotiate their mortgage, before I was 10 years old. And I was calling in sick for them knowing that they weren't even sick some days, and being faced with those kinds of dilemmas, right? And I, for whatever reason, I think one of my most memorable times of translating is my mom got in a car accident, and she had to go in to the emergency room and had to have her lip sewed back on, uh, and uh, and they had no translator for her, and so I got a call at home. So here I'm 16 years old. I got to go into the emergency room and translate to my mom live during surgery. I don't like hospitals. I don't like blood, right? But I have to. But you just click into another mode, right? And it's like I have to translate for my mom so that she understands what's going on during this surgery, right? So I feel all of that. I used to be kind of, when you look at it, you go, well, why did God burden me with that, you know, having to be a translator for my parents, right? Where I got to see other kids that didn't have to go through all of that. Uh, and so there are times maybe where you felt sorry for yourself today I feel so blessed that that I had that opportunity, to learn things the way I learned them. Um, but you know, and as a result, it's made me the person I am today. I'm a
Yeah.
translator, right? And so I have to translate what people want to say to the market in a way that the market wants to understand it. The same thing had to happen when I was young. I mean, what people don't understand about sign language is when you get into sign language, you realize everybody also automatically assumes it's the English language in sign, but it's not. It's really a different language,
Wow.
and the syntax is completely different, and so you have to constantly be translating, from the sentence-based world that you live in as a hearing person to a sign-based world, which is extremely noun-driven, and you got to get to the point. Like if I say, in normal life, "Hey, I need you to run over there and get me that right now." That's how you would say it, right? In sign language, it's like,
Sure.
"Now, you go," and it's just, it's you just cut out all the words and get right straight to it. And so being a translator for my mom and my dad has helped me. It's been a gift. It's been a gift, and I think many
Hmm.
people, if you really look at the experiences in your life and you ask yourself, "Why would God put you through that?" And I realized that God was preparing me exactly for what he was preparing me for. This campaign that I got done talking to you about, one the most interesting aspect of this campaign is when I got the call back in March originally to think about this and how to go to market about this. I asked the person who called me on this, I go, "Can I use the working title Campaign for Christ while we work on this?"
Hmm.
And the person said, "Sure, call whatever you want." I go, "Good." He goes, "Why do you ask?" I said, "Because I've had that written on my to-do list for 15 years. I don't know fully why.
Wow.
And I had it placed on my heart 15 years ago that I need to be a part of doing a campaign for Christ." And I said, "What you just called me today to do is something I feel like I've been prepared my entire life to do." And so, from a translator to working in the field the way that I've worked to getting to this point, having all the experiences that I've had. I've worked with over 300 uh, nonprofit organizations, most of them faith-based organizations, and I've spoken to over 200 groups on nonprofit marketing and branding. And then to finally arrive at this place where I'm ready, exactly at the time that God wants me to be ready to be able to do this campaign. I don't know how you even explain that other than it's God.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. In your book, Do More Good, you kind of you talk about this work that you've done with nonprofits over the years. I guess it almost feels like nonprofits really struggle with either the message or the language, or maybe it is a language barrier. Why are for-profit companies so good at getting their message out, and nonprofit companies seem to struggle in the mud and the muck of it all?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really core that's taught like in business school, for example, is risk and reward, right?
Hmm.
And so, you're taught. I went to business school. Even though I have an advertising degree, I got a scholarship to go to the University of Denver, and because I was a poor kid, but then they forced me to get a marketing degree through the business school. Again, wasn't my design. Um, but I was forced to
Yeah.
do it, and to this day, I could tell you, gosh, I'm so glad I was forced to do that. But in business school, they're very good about risk and reward. I mean, you just got to get comfortable with risk, and you have to realize you're not always going to be successful, and that's where you come. A lot of business people have this mindset of, I don't. They don't live in a win lose environment. They live in a win learn environment. And when you
Wow.
don't
Yeah.
win, when you don't win, you learn, and you learn how to do it even better. Now, this campaign that I just got done talking about, the He Gets Us campaign, was funded by business people, Christian business
Sure.
people. I didn't want to run the test campaign as early as we did, but I was told by a very successful business person, Bill, go spend the money and learn so that when we go national, you figured this out. So we're going to be more successful, right? That's a business
Mm,
mentality, right? Unfortunately, I think the nonprofit world lives in a scarcity mentality rather than an abundance mentality. And so as a result, they're risk adverse. I mean, that's the only thing I can really chalk it up to is they don't see as win and learn. They see as win and lose. And if they lose, the costs are too great. They have to explain that to their donor base. They they don't understand that sometimes when you take a risk, you're going to lose. They can't explain that. They always want to err then on the side of being conservative in their choices, conservative in their efforts. And as a result, they don't really achieve the big strides and success that you see that the business world is able to do. Now there are exceptions. I mean, you look at the history of people like Martin Luther King and Billy Graham and stuff like that, and you go, those people were risk takers, right? Huge risk
yeah.
takers, and as a result, that's why they achieve the impact that they achieve. Uh, but then, as I look at so many nonprofit organizations and so many nonprofit leaders, are so afraid of taking risks that it actually stifles growth.
Mm. So let's talk a bit about the risk of putting your story down on paper and sending it out to the world, right? That do more
Yeah.
good. What is your a year from now, right? What are we celebrating that God did with this piece of writing? Like what's your end game with this book?
Well, interestingly enough, this is where that campaign, that He Gets Us campaign, and the book actually connect. Um, the book is set up in using a proprietary process that I've learned from the world's greatest marketers, but have packaged it in such a way that's easy to follow for a nonprofit organization, right? And that is, there is a process for achieving success uh, in the marketplace, and especially when you're communicating about and wanting to grow your success in the marketplace. And it's the ideas process is the acronym that I
Mm,
use. And it's about getting the insights that you need in order to put together messaging and direction that you need to do, right? So you need to do your homework, you need to do your research, you really need to do some fact finding, you need to talk to people, really need to look at the marketplace, you need to look at the landscape of things. And so what I encourage nonprofit organizations to do is do your homework, gather as many insights as you possibly can. And I give in the book, I give nonprofit organizations all kinds of tools and techniques on how to gather insights. But then from that point, you're going to have to develop a strategy and a direction. And that includes, some tactics, including how are you going to accomplish this? What is your
yeah.
strategy? How are you going to take this to market? And so that's the D in ideas. So you need to develop direction. But then you're going to have to explore different ways to express yourself in the marketplace. And I always encourage, like when we did this campaign, I ran this campaign and I own an advertising agency, and it would be very tempting for me to say me and my advertising agency are going to do this campaign. But what I told this group of investors in this particular assignment, I go, you want to impact culture for Christ? Let's talk to the agencies that are impacting culture already. Let's talk to the agencies that are doing Nike work. Let's talk to the agency that's doing
Yeah.
Gatorade work. Let's talk to the agencies that's doing, Budweiser and stuff like that, and see if they'll pitch this work. Client thought
Hmm.
the group of investors thought I was crazy. They go, well, if you can find Christians at these agencies, then we're willing. I got 5 agencies to pitch,
Wow.
and and so I asked each one of them to bring 3 ideas to the table. So we ended up, looking at 15 phenomenal ideas from these agencies, and we ended up selecting one. And they all went after this work really hard because number one, we were spending a lot of money, but number two, it was meaningful to them. I
Hmm.
found within these organizations and in leadership in these organizations that there are Christians in these organizations. Every one of these agencies that I asked to pitch not only agreed to pitch, they told me this was an assignment they were waiting their whole life to work on,
Wow.
right? And so, you
How'd
know,
he do it?
yeah. So when it came to expression, we explored every possible way to express this, and we chose, and because we were given so many excellent examples, we chose what we consider to be the most powerful one, right? And then it moves to action. How are we going to take this to market? What are we going to learn? But then the last one is success. And you always need to say to yourself before you get started on any initiative, how are we going to define success? And then you have to be ready to measure that at the end. And then you need to ask yourself some pretty hard questions when you get to the end of that process and say, okay, we did all this stuff. Did we achieve success? And if we did, how did we do it best? If we didn't, where did we fail? And no matter what, even if you did or you don't achieve success, there's always things that you can do better, or there's things that you can do differently. And then you get back to that at the beginning of the process. Those insights create new direction, which create new expression, and you've got to constantly be improving yourself and how you communicate to the marketplace. And so that's the process in which, you know, things come together. I can tell you, I've been working with the ideas process for over 30 years, right? This campaign for the nonprofit community or the faith-based community is the first time it was done at such a level of excellence that I would expect out of Nike, McDonald's, and Apple.
Wow.
So while I've done
Man,
it for
that's an
millions
incredible
of times,
tease. I
there's always, yeah, there's always compromises. There were always compromises, like, well, we don't want to spend
yeah.
that much, or we don't want to do that, or there was always there were no absolutely no compromises made here. And what I can tell you from the 10 market test already is to say, when I tell you 30 million YouTube views of our work, we only expose this work to 10% of America.
Wow.
So if we actually advertise this to America, our results will be 10 times that,
That's incredible.
right? And so that's where the two come together is I've been working ideas for a long time, but convincing the nonprofit and faith-based community that you really need to do it at the level that business does it. This is the first time in my career that it's been done to perfection.
Oh, I love God's timing in all of it, right? It's a
Yeah.
perfect it's the perfect intersection, and I think it's exciting to hear about, and it's exciting to see, and I can't wait for nonprofits to get this book in their hands, and I can't wait for America to see this campaign because it sounds like it's just going to be an absolute home run. Now I know my listeners are going to want to connect with you. I've got one more question for you, but before I ask it, where's the best place all over the interwebs to learn about Do More Good, to connect to your nonprofit kind of resource? Because you got tons of resources out there, so many free resources for nonprofits. If you are connected to a nonprofit, if you've got a church, and you have the ability to share information with your pastor, I'm telling you that this information is so good out here on the interwebs. Where's the best starting place, Bill?
Yeah, just go to domoregood.org, and you can
Yeah,
start there, and then there's ways to send us messages through that. That's the easiest one to remember. I have other email addresses and stuff like that, but that's the easiest place for people to remember.
that's great. And you guys are out there on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the different places where you would expect a world class, advertising agency to be. And
Yeah.
so it's really easy to find. So
Yeah.
you're clearly doing your job well. All right. Last question. I always love to ask people, and you've been so generous with your time today. I'm incredibly thankful. It's an advice question, and I
Okay.
ask you to go back and give yourself one piece of advice. And I'm going to ask you to go back to young Bill the day after you graduate from the University of Denver. So you've graduated from the University of Denver. If you could go back and say something to that young man, what would you say?
Well, I would say that I wish I would have gotten, 'cause I spent many years just doing secular work, right? Uh, I,
Yeah.
I, I, I can honestly look back and say that's part of God's plan too, right?
Hmm.
As much as I hate the idea that I wasted all those years doing just secular work, uh, but
Yeah.
I learned from the best in the business, and I learned virtually everything that I wrote in Do More Good, the book, are things that I've learned in the secular market, right? Uh, and so I've just been applying those principles to the nonprofit and faith-based market. But you know, I just wish I would have been more quick to start applying what I knew to the work of the kingdom, right? I For too
Mm.
long, until I was 33 years old, I didn't merge the two, right? My business life was my
Wow.
business life, my faith life was my faith life. And it wasn't until I was 33 years old in 1994 did I combine the two. And I can tell you that um, when I finally combined the two, I've never felt more blessed in my entire life. I've never felt more at peace in my entire life. Uh, and so I would just encourage anybody listening to this, if you're getting tugged in two different directions and maybe God has you on a path that's important for you to learn certain things, um, don't put off kingdom work. Just don't put off kingdom work. I wish I would have gotten to it sooner. 33 years old sounds pretty young. Now that I'm 60, it sounds super young. But I can tell you when I was 33 years old, I already felt like an old man because I had spent so much time working my butt off very hard in secular work, right? And but and so that would be the advice: is get to that sooner, as soon as you can. Kingdom work is
Mm.
the most important work in this entire world. It's the only thing that really matters, and so the sooner you can really combine those two things, and I'm probably with your audience, I'm preaching to the choir, right? Um, but at the same time, it is really critical that you don't your work, regardless of what it is, should be God's work too.
Amen. Amen. That's so good.
Mm,
Bill, I can't thank you enough for the conversation today. It was such a joy to
thank you.
learn about you and your story. And I always know it's a good interview when I don't get to all the questions, and I hardly got to any of the questions that I wanted to ask. But I think we got right where God wanted us to be. So thank
Ah,
you so much. I deeply appreciate it.
yeah, I appreciate it too. Thank you very much, and bless you and what you're trying to do and bring important content for people to learn and understand and grow. And iron sharpening iron. I love that whole concept. It's always been what I love doing, and I hear that in what you're doing. So thank you for your time.